And to some extent, you're also helping to synthesize a number of different disciplines at the same time, like the synthesis of ideas. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago with another podcast guest who's a friend of mine, and he's a professor at Berklee College of Music. And we were talking about the importance of taking in the information and being able to synthesize ideas from all these different disciplines. His take on that to some extent is that, we're still living in a Newtonian universe, right? Since the days of Newton, we are still very linear thinking, concrete thinking kind of a society, which is, as he was saying, the sad part of that is we're now entering a century since Einstein's ideas became public. And Einstein could see things in a much more synthesized and much more three-dimensional. And it's interesting because the deeper you get into Einstein, you see this. Einstein has a lot of the mysterious. I wouldn't say certainly religious, but the mysterious and the mythological with the science. There's a synthesis there, right?
There's a spirituality. I think to study that level.
And we haven't even unpacked that yet because we're still on the 1600s, and how
there's this for all of American, and I'm sure you might get some hate mail for this for me, for all American ingenuity, and it is remarkable. But by the same token, when I studied the Crucible with my kids, when I've only had sophomores a few times, but when I studied the Crucible, we actually didn't even touch the book. The first thing we started with was art. And I would show them portraits from the 1600s in the U.S., in the colonies, versus portrait work in Europe.
Mm-hmm. Big difference.
Huge. We were like third grade drawings, because we just had stepped away from everything artistic. Like if it brought joy, if it was creative, if it was artistic, whatever it was, just don't do it. It's bad.
The Puritans sang in their services and were not allowed. It was considered a sin if they sang melodiously, if they harmonized, or if they all sang in time with each other. I simply cannot imagine what 17th century Puritan singing must have sounded like.
We are so stunted. It's a miracle we have a fashion industry. Because we're and the kids would look at you look at paintings of, even prior to that, look at paintings of Queen Elizabeth. When I did Romeo and Juliet, we studied portraiture work and looked at how much meaning was put into every painting she did, how nothing was happenstance, how she controlled every element of it. And so really looking at how a painting would say everything from her status to what she wanted for the future, to her belief on what she owned and so, as you mentioned, synthesis, this idea of bringing it all in. And so when you study a piece of literature, when you listen to a song, you don't respond to it because you necessarily know the notes or because you know the words. You respond to it because whatever experience you've had, there's something in your gut that you feel whatever. And even if the writer and the performer never meant for it, whatever it brings out in you, however you connect to it, that's what it means. And that had to be the thing with literature also, is listen, just because I feel this way about it, I'm 45, you're 18 or you're 14. We shouldn't think the same thing about a book.
No.
We shouldn't feel the same. We should not be, if either you are a really old soul or I need to get my priorities in order, because if I'm thinking about everything the same way a 14-year-old does, then something's wrong.
Yeah, that's right.
And so getting them to that point where they stop worrying about what I think the answer should be, and just, okay, well, why do you like this character? Why do you not like them? Why do they bother you? How do you respond to them? And more important, well, equally important, what's the experience that each of you has in your life that brings you to that metacognition of why you think like that, why you feel like that you had a parental figure who wasn't always very responsive to your needs. And so you get that character, you feel angry with that character in that text because of that.
And you have some unifying themes going on in some of your classes. In our discussion earlier, you mentioned literature that focused on, and I could be mischaracterizing this slightly, but focused on female empowerment, women empowerment of some kind.
Yes. Oh my goodness, I
want you to talk about that a little bit,
I love
We
this
never had
course.
that, to my knowledge. We never had that back in school.
But
And if
no,
we did, I I I I know we didn't, because it would have been extremely remarkable to me as a boy, you know, that we would even be having that as something to focus on in an English course back in the day. That's not to say that
no.
from time to time we didn't study female authors, but it was really more like, I can remember, because I really dug into her work, and as an adult I became a big fan of hers. But I remember the first time we read Maya Angelou. But it seemed like when we were talking about female authors, it was always poets.
Yes.
I can't recall a serious study, and also it certainly wouldn't have been modern female writers at all.
No, definitely not. And even, I mean, the conversations that should be had around someone like Maya Angelou. I mean, it's one thing because a lot of ours was like, here, read the book and take a test, like I mentioned earlier. I mean, legit, I still don't know what the Bridge over the River Kwai was doing. I still, to this day, I'm like, I know I read it for summer reading. I have to go back and read it
It
again
just
because I
didn't knock you out.
know what this book was about.
Well,
And
how about this? No, sorry to interrupt you, but you're
no,
jogging my memory. Maya Angelou, I know why the cage bird sings. This is about freedom, and it's about the feeling that you desire freedom, and that everybody needs freedom, right? But we never unpacked the fact that she was a Black woman during Jim Crow in America, or any of those things.
who was molested and who was writing about
I,
her molestation.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, we did. And I'm talking about having read this. I don't know. It must have been sometime in high school. So, in
Yeah,
other
it
words,
would have been high
age
school.
appropriate
Yep.
to actually unpack her life.
We never
We
learned about
never
her. The fact that she was a single mother who became pregnant and wrote this book and had this tremendous career as a single mom. That she was close friends with people like Angela Davis, and that they created the second wave of feminism
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Right.
while white Christian women were running around going, God, I want a job, please let me out of the kitchen. Black,
That
Hispanic,
people
and
like
Latino
that.
women and Asian women were like, what are you talking about? Who doesn't have a job? Like, who
Right.
is without a
That
job?
James Baldwin was a friend, and was she was his confidant. He depended
Yes.
on her ideas. Said, like, what do you think? You know.
Yep. No, we really didn't. I think the other female author we had was Harper Lee, who, and
Right.
again, who we never talked about the fact that Harper Lee, the A was the only book she wrote, that she was best friends with Truman Capote
Yeah.
and was his confidant. And so yeah, there's this thing of studying, and there's certainly the study around, looking at a piece of music or a piece of literature or film and not going into context, not going into like all the space around it. But I think there's so much richness left there, like lost there if you don't.
Oh, you have to at some point in time. I understand art for art's sake. Honestly, you can't even appreciate art for art's sake without a general. I've always personally, maybe I'm just speaking for myself personally. I've always found it way more enriching when the more you know about the artists themselves. I mean, why isn't it just interesting on its face? Why does the writer write?
That's what artists do, though. I mean,
Why do artists?
thank goodness for
What's
them
their
right
motivation?
they're the conscious of our nation. They see what's happening, they write about it, or they paint about it, or they sing about it. And so I think it's really vital to know you can't listen to Four Women and not learn about Nina Simone
Yeah.
and not look at the places where she played it. And it's this thing of you need you can't, I mean, there's this famous story about Billie Holiday singing Strange Fruit, and she was in a white nightclub and singing it, and she hadn't sung the song yet. I'm sorry, she was performing, and one of the white women down the front said, can you sing the song about the beautiful fruit on the trees? And word has it, she literally got up and walked out. She was like, I'm done, I'm not performing anymore.
Right.
This
Right.
idea of just not understanding, like, how do you, but
Dense can be.
we all
Right.
do it too, though. I've watched my kids now, and one of the great blessings in teaching high schoolers is, even if I don't necessarily like some of the music they listen to, I get to hear it.
Yeah.
Right.
And so hearing what they're listening to and how it reflects what they're experiencing, there's this new sort of a type of rap music called trap.
Oh yeah.
And it's aggressive and it's violent and it's really guttural. And I don't necessarily enjoy it. But when I look at the world that our kids are in right now, with social media coming at them from every angle, with a planet that's burning up on them, that they may not be able to have children or grandchildren, I'm like, no wonder why they listen to this music. They
Right.
are angry. They are frustrated. They do feel like no one's listening to them, and they do feel like they need to scream at the top of their lungs and say
Yeah.
vulgar.
And if you believe music, like all other forms of art, all other mediums of art, is simply a dialogue. It's somebody's trying to say something to you. Even if you don't aesthetically like it, if you deeply understand that that's what art is, then how can you say, yeah, I just don't like rap music, and anyone who makes rap music, I ain't going to listen to that. You have to listen to it. It's you know, it's 30 years ago, people not liking gangster rap. Well, why don't you like gangster rap? Because it's threatening to white people. Well, maybe it should be. They're not being threatening to white people. They're saying what's happening in their neighborhood today.
Yep.
Well, that can't be happening. Why can't it be happening? Why do you say that? You can't just shut off what these young people are saying. They're telling you what's happening. And they could tell you simply by telling you. They've chosen a medium that is musically artistic.
Yep.